Hello everyone.
Hi there. Welcome back to another book discussion on Telescola. We are your hosts. I am Mr. Darrell.
And I am Miss Maka.
Today, Ms. Maka, we're talking about another novel by Thomas Hardy.
Yeah, the Trumpet-Major.
Did you know it was his only historical novel?
Oh yes, this is the only historical and also a good one.
Yeah. Just because it's historical doesn't mean it's a bad one.
No, of course, it doesn't. So, but before we continue discussions about the book, let's look at the agenda. So, how we have planned today's program. The first one is the new vocabulary, 8 words for you. Then we will talk about the author, Thomas Hardy. After that, we will tell you the summary of the book.
And in order to know how the summary goes from start to finish, you need to know characters because they are the parts that move a story forward. What about the setting? You need to know the setting as well. It's extremely important, especially for historical novels. And we need to look at the main themes.
Of course. And after introducing the main themes, we will give you an interesting homework.
Shall we move to the vocabulary now?
Yeah, sure.
We have 8 words to look at. The first one is invasion. Invasion, it's a noun. It's an act or an instance of an invading or entering as an opposing army, especially doing war.
შეჭრა, დაპყრობა.
Our next word is navy. It's a noun as well. The whole body of warships and other kinds of vessels that belong to a country or ruler.
Ploti.
Intervention, it's a noun, intervention, the interference of one state in the affairs of another.
ჩარევა, შუამდგომლობა.
As you can see already from the first 3 words, we're dealing with a war historical fiction.
Yeah, of course.
The next word is decent, an adjective, decent. This is conforming to the acknowledged and recognized standards of good taste, good behavior, modesty, and so on.
Yeah, accepted, right? წესიერი, მოკრძალებული.
Our next word is to elope. To elope. This is to run off secretly to be married, usually without the consent or knowledge of your parents.
გაქცევა, შეყვარებულთან ერთად.
Our next word is to encounter. Encounter, the verb. To come upon or meet up with unexpectedly.
მოულოდნელად შეხვედრა.
To comfort, that's the next word, to comfort. It's a verb. To soothe, to console, to reassure, to bring happiness to.
ნუგეშისცემა, დამშვიდება.
And our last word is distracted. Distracted, an adjective. This is having one's attention diverted or pushed to another area.
თავგზა აბნეული, დაბნეული.
All right, Ms. Maka, let's move on.
Of course, we need to look at the creator of the story, the author, Thomas Hardy, who was born in 1840s and died in 1928. He was an English novelist and a poet.
He was a Victorian who was highly critical of Victorian society, especially on the declining status of rural people in southwest England.
Yeah. While Hardy wrote poetry, he was acclaimed by younger poets like Ezra Pound and W.H. Auden.
2 great poets from the 20th century.
Yes.
Initially, he gained fame as the author of novels such as Far from the Madding Crowd, which we're quite familiar with, The Mayor of Casterbridge in 1886, Test of the D'Urbervilles in 1891, and Jude the Obscure in 1895.
Yeah, and many of his novels actually concern characters struggling against their passions and social circumstances. They are often set in semi-fictional place, Wessex, initially based on the medieval Anglo-Saxon kingdom.
And 2 of his novels, Test of the D'Urbervilles and Far from the Madding Crowd, were listed in the top 50 books in a BBC survey.
Yeah, well, interesting. So now, Mr. Darrell, let's have a question about the author. You say that Thomas Hardy thought of himself as a poet first. Can novel writers be successful at poetry too?
I think they can, but it's not that easy. Novels and poetry takes different qualities to make them good, and it is really hard to be a master at both of them at the same time.
That's an interesting answer, very good answer. Although I might disagree, I think certain novelists can be good poets.
Yeah, and especially when we have the example like Thomas Hardy, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Now let's move on and look at the summary of the book. So the Trumpet-Major appeared in monthly installments in the magazine Good Words. The name is great, right? So very positive. Running from January to December in 1880s. In October 1808, it was published by Smith, Elder and Co. in 3-volume form.
Now, Thomas Hardy is an experimental writer, basically. He's always trying to push something new in each of his novels. And in this historical novel, you might think he's being traditional, but he's not. He's again experimenting. But the subject matter had appealed to his imagination for a long time.
Yeah, the plot of the Trumpet-Major, actually, as often in Hardy, is in essence a simple one. The stuff of a folk song, and Garland. The heroine is wooed by 2 brothers, a soldier and a sailor.
Again, the heavy emphasis on the army and military affairs. Now, since John Loveday, the Trumpet-Major of the book, is eventually going to fight Napoleon in Spain, while the other brother, Bob, is going to take part in the Battle of Trafalgar, if you know the history of Napoleon. It's a big battle. Hardy has time, the author Thomas Hardy has time to think about the momentous events of the period and how to approach it from the English coast, the Wessex coast.
Interesting. So the opening words of the novel is very carefully chosen. In the days of high-waisted and muslin-gowned women, it is to be, among other things, a costume drama, an exercise in nostalgia, a picturesque and full of color. So can you imagine that? How beautiful it would be, like, according to the description, of course.
Especially if it's set during the Napoleonic era, where the fashion was really grandiose.
Yeah.
Perhaps for this very reason, the Trumpet-Major has tended to be critically underrated. It's not automatically one of the novels that comes up when you ask someone for like great novels.
Yeah.
It seems to have a lot in common with certain light works of romantic historical fiction, and therefore has been mistaken for just a simple kind of romantic novel.
So, but there is a good deal more to the novel than that. Its complexity resides not so much in the story as in the way it is told.
So the way you tell something can often change the quality from low quality to high quality.
Sure, and this is what happens in the story.
Well, I have a question for the audience now. Well, what do you think of the costume drama that we just spoke about? The costume drama genre.
Costume dramas are usually light-hearted entertainment, but in the hands of a master like Thomas Hardy, they can also reveal deep psychological insights. Stanley Kubrick also made a drama costume film named Barry Lyndon, which was a masterpiece.
Very good point. Yeah, just because it's a costume drama doesn't mean that it's simple entertainment.
Of course, sure. It's just to make it more beautiful, the scene and everything.
Yeah, you can still put a lot of psychological inspiration into it.
Yeah, sure.
Let's move on to the characters now. Okay, we have, first of all, Bob Loveday, but there's something I have to mention right now. It's based on the genre of the Harlequin fiction, the Harlequinade, it's called. It was popular in Italy and it was popular in England at the same time. And what Thomas Hardy does is take a lot of the stereotypical characters and put them into this novel. So basically it's a novel of that genre, which was an entertainment genre, but now he's making it a kind of artistic work. So this character, the first one, Bob Loveday, is based on the stereotypical character called the Harlequin from this genre. Now in the genre, the Harlequin is a romantic male lead who's kind of a servant and in love with Columbine, and he's often mischievous. Now if you look at the character of Bob Loveday,
yeah, so he dresses in elaborate, colorful costume and is portrayed as acrobatic. So his high spirits actually and his wit work to save him from the scrapes he gets himself into. It is easy to see Bob as a harlequin.
He walks around in his new uniform to impress Anne, and just like the harlequin stereotype, he is susceptible to falling in love with any available young woman when he's away from Anne.
Yeah, a strong tradition of the harlequinade was the harlequin's great leap. So his huge leap, like Bob's huge leap into an apple tree just to escape from the press gang, his figure flying like a raven's across the sky is typical of this. His subsequent escape through a trapdoor in the mill is as theatrical a piece of acrobatics as any found in Commedia dell'arte.
Yeah, the chase you mentioned is closely based on the famous Italian harlequinade comedy called The Chase.
Ooh, interesting. Our next character is Anne Garland. So based on Columbine, Columbine is a pretty young woman who has caught the eye of Harlequin. Sometimes she is the female equivalent of Harlequin, dressed in similar costume, the one that I mentioned, like colorful one.
So her role usually centers on her romantic relationship with Harlequin in the classic, in the stereotypical harlequinade stories. Now here, Anne Garland is this typical Columbine woman, shy but playful, unable to choose between the brothers, John and Bob, and so on.
And her prettiness actually is the counterparted with her strengths of character. So, and her playfulness is evident throughout the text. So she was not as strong as beautiful she was.
Now let's look at the next character, Squire Derriman. He too is based on a stereotypical harlequinade character, that of Pantaloon. So in those original stories, the Pantaloon was a greedy merchant obsessed with money and the master of Columbine, that character. And despite his cunning, he's often tricked by Harlequin.
So he tries to keep the lovers apart, but he is usually and always outwitted by the young hero, Squire Derriman. Likewise, he's neurotic, old, and wizened.
Yeah, Anne is his heiress, and his fondness for Anne mirrors Pantaloon's feelings for Columbine.
Our next character is Festus Derriman. So based on Captain. The captain exaggerated his post-exploits, was courageous about the ideas of fighting, and cowardly when faced with actual danger.
And he's usually drunken and incompetent. Now, Festus, our character here, has all of those characteristics. He boasts to Anne about his fighting prowess. He hides with the women when there's a rumor of invasion, doesn't want to fight in the war, and he's partial to drinking. He's a drunk.
No, okay. Who's the next one?
Matilda Johnson, who's based on this character called Soubrette. Now, in the original stories, Soubrette is a minor character in these Commedia dell'arte, who sometimes marries Harlequin, but sometimes marries Pantaloon.
And like Matilda, she's also characterized by her loose morals, a love of life and enjoyment of intrigue. After that comes another, our actually last character for today. This is John Loveday, the Trumpet-Major himself. So in Commedia dell'arte, Pierrot was a comic servant character, often naive and always heartbroken by his unrequited love for Columbine.
The French version of Pierrot became something of a 19th century mime or meme kind of. a melancholy, white-faced figure, pensive and silent.
Yeah, and actually he is a thoughtful character, usually heartbroken. His pallor is often remarked too, and nod at Pierrot-painted white face.
Okay, good. So we've finished with the characters. We've seen how they are linked to the harlequinade genre.
Now, Mr. Darrell, it is time to ask a question to our audience. So these characters are directly based on standard and typical character types from the genre of harlequinade. Do you think this kind of inspiration is effective?
I personally prefer authors who use their original ideas in their novels, but I must admit there is some skill that is being shown here. Thomas Hardy takes something that is not his own and make this different.
Very good. Good answer. So sometimes authors are original and to be celebrated, but sometimes they take other material and make it better.
Yeah, they change something, so they add their own
Twist.
Exactly.
Okay, let's move on to the setting, the when and the where of the story. Let's look at the when. Now, something very important is the Napoleonic War period, particularly the fear of invasion that the English felt. At the time, they felt that Napoleon was going to invade England, just like later on with Hitler and World War II. They had the same fears. And so Thomas Hardy sets his story right there in that particular moment.
In 1878, Thomas Hardy went to the reading room of the British Museum and read some contemporary accounts of the Napoleonic Wars. He noted his findings in what became known as the Trumpet-Major notebook, now in the Dorset County Museum, so everyone can see it.
His original notes. Hardy also met with Chelsea pensioners, people who had fought in the war. And the Trumpet-Major, published in 1880, was born from that research. And he's famous for having done quite a lot of research for this book.
Wow. Now let's look at the where part of this story. So unlike Thomas Hardy's other novels, where the stories are set in more fictional areas, the real events of 1804-1805, when Dorset was preparing for the palpable threat of French invasion near Weymouth, permit the Trumpet-Major, a danger that only receded with the victory at Trafalgar.
Yeah, there's a lot of these realistic moments throughout the novel, from Anne Garland and the old sailor watching out for victory from the English coast, looking towards France, to the fear of imminent invasion from the French army. All of these details are presented in the book by Thomas Hardy with a very strong, historical sense of feeling.
So with the ultimate fate of the young men unknown in a time of war serves to make the lightness and comedy that runs through the Trumpet-Major bittersweet, but the novel is all the deeper than and richer for that sense of a tragic epilogue.
Well, I think it's time for another question to the audience. Now, does Thomas Hardy's fascination with Napoleon make for a good story?
It depends on the skill of the author, but I think it won't necessarily be a negative thing. Sometimes a strong passion for something can make the story even more powerful.
Well said.
Well, thank you very much. So, now Mr. Darrell, I think it is time for our main themes.
Yes, you're right. So we have a couple of themes. The first one, as we've spoken so much about it being a historical novel, is the preservation of the past. Now, Hardy's chief interest is the process of time and the workings of memory. He's looking back to the early years of the 19th century, but many of the descriptions he gives go back to even earlier times. So each kind of builds on top of each other. It's like the ultimate kind of historical novel.
Yeah, and there is an account of a box, like clothes box, that contained costumes from a previous century. Also at Oxwell Hall, a decaying mansion, the iron supports inside the panes were eaten away to the size of wires.
So there's a hugely nostalgic thing to this. Everything's like old, everything's decaying,
exactly.
everything is... Okay, so...
From the previous century. So they're trying kind of to remind us of the past.
Very much so. Numerous objects and scenes have a life, a past life of their own, a kind to have offered Hardy material for a lot of the poems he wrote as well.
Yeah, and the affection and the sense of personal engagement are in evidence throughout the novel, giving its distinctive quality. The characters, though engaging enough, are little more than stereotypes. Yeah.
Hardy is focused on preserving the past, and this book can be looked at as like a meditation on what's good about the past and how it's transformed when we remember it.
Thank you. So our next topic, next main theme, is actually something that Mr. Darrell has already mentioned. This is Harlequinade. So it's a British comic theatrical genre defined by the Oxford English Dictionary as that part of pantomime in which the harlequin and clown play the principal parts. It developed in England between the centuries 17th and 19th.
So just to recap, because again this is connected to the way the characters we mentioned earlier are, the story of the Harlequinade revolves around a comic incident in the lives of its five main characters. The Harlequin, who loves Columbine, Columbine's greedy and foolish father, Pantaloon, who tries to separate the two lovers, the mischievous clown, and the servant, Perrault, who's usually involved in chaotic chases with a bumbling policeman.
Yeah, and originally actually a mime, silent act with music and some specific particular dance. The Harlequinade later employed some dialogues, but before, as we've already mentioned, it was quite silent. It was silent, but it remained primarily a visual spectacle. Early in its development, it achieved great popularity as the comic closing part of a longer evening of entertainment. In old days, so it was really, really popular, following a more serious presentation with operatic and balletic elements.
Very good. But then, of course, by the 19th century, it's become something bigger, something more spectacular. Like we might think of it as like the blockbusters of its day. The ending was always presented with a huge kind of stage effect of a spectacular kind.
Interesting, and it is very good that we are right now introducing you to this type of genre, because it lost popularity towards the end of 19th century and disappeared altogether in 1930s. But we should never forget our past, I would say.
Very good. I think you have a question for the audience.
Yes, I do. So, why do you think Thomas Hardy looks to memory with such interest and fascination?
Well, the reason I think he did this is because he remained fascinated by his childhood memories, and he wanted to find a way to tell and show the world how much his childhood memories meant for his creativity and also inspiration.
Well, that's a great answer.
Yeah.
Well, what about you yourself? Do you look back at your childhood memories with great nostalgia?
Yeah, of course, and I would say that the person who I am right now is greatly because of the person I was in my childhood and how I formed my childhood as personality.
So if we had met you as a child, you'd be the same as you are now?
Yeah, I would say yes, or no. Who knows? I don't know, but I really have this nostalgia to my childhood because I had great childhood, and I do agree with Thomas Hardy that it is important
to remember the past.
Sure, of course.
Very good.
Okay, so now I think it is time to slowly move to an end of today's program. And we started talking about the author, Thomas Hardy.
Then we looked at the summary. You know, it's a story of, it takes this classic genre of harlequinade and makes it a novel.
Then we had different harlequinade characters who actually make up the story.
The setting is the early 19th century, specifically the Napoleonic Wars.
And the main themes that we had, they were the presentation of the past and the genre harlequinade.
Let's have a look at the words one last time. We had invasion, navy, intervention, decent, to elope, to encounter, to comfort, and distracted.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Darrell. But we will not forget the final part of our program, giving homework.
Okay, here's our question for today. Historically based, kind of. The harlequinade genre is an example of folk tales and structures influencing a work of high art, like a novel. Can you discuss Georgian folk tales that a writer might be able to use in a story of high art in a novel?
ბუფონა და ხალხური ზღაპრების მაგალითია, რომელიც გავლენას ახდენს მაღალი ხელოვნების მწერალზე. განიხილეთ ქართული ხალხური ზღაპრები, რომელთა გამოყენება მაღალ ხელოვნებაშია შესაძლებელი.
Thank you very much. And they can send these answers, of course, to the address they see on the screen.
დავალებები შეგიძლიათ გამოაგზავნოთ ეკრანზე მითითებულ მისამართზე.
Well, Ms. Mark, it was great going down childhood memory lane with you.
Yes, it was. And I really like to introduce a new type of genre, like not new, old, but maybe for some people new type of genre. You would name it.
Harlequinade.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you, the audience, for your interesting answers.
And thank you, Ms. Maka, for a great discussion.
So, it is time to say goodbye and see you next week.
Until then, have a great week.